The Conservative Party and the Bloc Québécois says House Speaker Greg Fergus must resign. Fergus is facing fresh criticism for language used in an advertisement for an event in his riding.
The promotional material of this event uses very partisan, inflammatory language concerning the Conservative Party and the leader of the official opposition. For the good of the institution, of Parliament, and the enduring interest of the House of Commons, I regret to say that the Speaker must go.
Catherine Cullen is the host of CBC's The House, and she's here to take us through what happened today. Okay, Catherine, let's start with the event advertisement that set this all in motion. What's the issue?
Well, it is called A Summer Evening with the Honourable Greg Fergus. Sounds fine so far, right, David? A barbecue in the Hull-Elmer riding to thank volunteers. Still, no problem. Where things run aground is the language, as you just heard from Chris Workington, that was actually used in the description on the Liberal Party website. So let's take a look at that. This is, according to Greg Fergus's office, some of the generic language that gets used by the Liberal Party at all of these events. But it says, while Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives propose reckless policies that would risk our health, safety and pocketbooks, our Liberal team is focused on making life more affordable for Canadians. Not something you would necessarily blink at from your average MP, but when you're the Speaker of the House of Commons, when you're supposed to be non-partisan, you're supposed to be the referee. That is why it was provoking this kind of umbrage from the Conservatives, the Bloc Québécois as well. And of course, David, we have to acknowledge that this is not the first time that Greg Fergus has faced questions about some of the language that he's used. People will recall, perhaps most of all, that back in the fall, he made a video that was played at the Ontario Liberal Party convention in which he was wearing his speaker's robes when he praised an Ontario Liberal MP, the outgoing party leader, interim party leader. Right. He wound up apologizing for that. There have been other instances too. He was in Washington, D.C. for a speaker's visit, did some reminiscing about being a young Liberal at a speech. That did not go over too well. So all of this adding up to a fresh call from the Conservatives for him to step aside. Okay, language, as you say, that'd be fine for your average MP, but the Speaker is not the average MP. And the Conservatives in the Bloc had already lost confidence in Speaker Fergus, so that's nothing new there. But the NDP is sort of the swing vote on this, or the core vote on this. Where have they been landing on this latest incident? Yeah, so this is the question. If there was some suspense in all of this, it is what is the NDP going to do? It didn't seem that there was any indication that Greg Fergus was going to take this advice and just step away. Perhaps was this one strike too many? Well, let's listen to what the NDP had to say.
I regret that the Liberal Party of Canada basically blindsided the Speaker. We're not going to play games every day with the Conservatives trying to raise this constantly. The Speaker has a role to play, and we'd like him to continue to play it.
So blindsided the Speaker. You can see which side of the coin they fell on there. And what's more than that, Peter Julian said, you know what, frankly, I think the Liberal Party should be apologizing to Greg Fergus in all this. Lo and behold, what happened shortly thereafter, the Liberal Party tweeted out an apology to Greg Fergus. I believe we've got the text of that, in which they say the language that was posted on the event webpage of Liberal.ca was auto-populated standard language we use for events on our website and was posted without your, Greg Fergus's, knowledge. And as a result of a miscommunication between the party and the Riding Association, this language has been corrected. The Liberal Party of Canada unequivocally apologizes to you for this mistake, and we take full responsibility. Okay, listening to that clip was Peter Julian, who's standing by, is going to be with us next. So how did the other parties take the news that the NDP was standing by Fergus yet again? Yeah, this is perhaps one of the more remarkable moments of today, because we do see this pattern occurring with some real frustration at some of the behavior of Fergus or surrounding Fergus. So what is all of this doing to the relationships in the House of Commons? Let's listen to what the Bloc Québécois had to say.
The NDP is usually the cavalry that comes to the rescue of a minority government which can hardly defend itself.
The cavalry coming to a minority government that can hardly defend itself. So it does seem like this may not have legs beyond this one day, David, frankly, given how all of the pieces of this have played out. But of course, there are a lot of interesting questions for what it means for the relationships inside of the House of Commons. Question period has at times been tense at best, including the relationship with the Speaker in terms of some of the parties. So a lot to chew on here, even if we aren't necessarily talking about this one specific incident for weeks to come. All right, Catherine, thank you so much. That's the CBC's Catherine Cullen. We're going to head now to the foyer of the House of Commons, where I'm joined by NDP House Leader Peter Julian and Bloc Québécois MP René Villemure. I should say, before we get started, that we did request representatives from both the Liberal and Conservative parties, but none were made available. But gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for joining us today. Peter Julian, are you the cavalry riding to the rescue of the Liberals here on this one, as Mr. Blanchette suggested earlier today?
No, we're the adults in the room. We've seen how Conservatives
and Bloc, and sometimes the Liberals get involved in these partisan messes. And what the NDP is doing is focusing, as Jagmeet Singh has negotiated, put in place things that are going to make a difference in the lives of people. Pharmacare, that legislation has to pass in the next couple of weeks. The affordable housing financing, actually building affordable homes for Canadians, that has to pass soon. The anti-scab legislation that provides good support for workers who are out on strike. They no longer will have to face replacement workers at the federal level. That needs to pass. School lunch program needs to pass. All of these things need to pass. And the Conservatives want to go through a couple of weeks long drama around the speakership because that serves Mr. Poilievre. Basically getting nothing done, burning down the House of Commons serves Mr. Poilievre. The reality is, in this case, the Speaker consulted the Clerk of the House, had correspondence that went out to his riding, went out to his constituents, which was appropriate, and then he was blindsided by the Liberal Party of Canada posting something without his authorization, without his knowledge. It was promptly taken down. But the idea that we would spend weeks around this, rather than just getting back to the work of the House of Commons to actually help people, is something, of course, that Jagmeet Singh and the NDP reject. We want to get things done. And pharmacare, I'll just mention, helps 6 million Canadians having pharmacare for people who suffer from diabetes. Contraception helps 9 million Canadians. There are a lot of people that can be helped by the legislation that currently is being stalled by the Conservatives and to a lesser extent the Bloc in the House of Commons, and that we need to get through before we rise next month.
Okay, so Mr. Villemure, I mean, your party has long declared you have no confidence in Speaker Fergus, but you didn't try to bring him down today with any kind of emotion because you sort of said you'll vote against him when the opportunity presents itself, but you're not instigating it directly. I wonder, though, if you accept the explanation that this was a screw-up by the Liberal Party, that they published this on their webpage through an auto-generated script, and as a result, Mr. Fergus gets an apology and should be let off the hook. What do you think?
Well, I disagree completely. See, ethics suffers no exceptions. In this case, the level of arrogance is not unseen because we're getting used to it, but it's very disappointing. Trying to make up this type of argument doesn't make any sense at all. Mr. Fergus is not at his first failure on the ethical matter. It's at least its third, and now he got to be kept accountable for that. We got to get some accountability from him because obviously over 150 members of the House don't have confidence in the Speaker, and that is a problem. Mr. Fergus is overly partisan, and this will not get away from him. This is him.
Okay, it's him because it was an event organized by his riding association, but there's no evidence to suggest he approved this language or put the language there. He sought clearance from the clerk, and Mr. Villemure, the party did apologize and kind of swallowed themselves whole here, saying, boy, this was our screw-up, because you'd think Greg Fergus, after everything that's happened, would know to be careful.
Yeah, I think I would expect him to be more careful, but since last December, we haven't put our confidence in him, and we've looked at things in the House. This is overly partisan in most of his decisions, and we just don't agree with the explanation of the Liberal Party. This is a bit weird. Mind you, the Speaker may not have known about this thing, but it's a habit on his side, and this is just makes sense with what he did in the past. So, you know, it doesn't make sense to us.
So two things.
Go ahead, Mr. Joy.
Yeah, first off, we fined Mr. Fergus. He apologized to the House for those events last December. There's been no reoccurrence since that time. That's important to mention. Secondly, what the Conservatives object to most is what the leader of the Bloc Québécois actually supported, which was when Mr. Poilievre started disrespecting Parliament by launching unparliamentary insults in the floor of the House of Commons. All the other parties, and I'm including the Greens and the Bloc in this, all supported Mr. Fergus, as Speaker, calling Mr. Poilievre to order. And Mr. Poilievre was forced to withdraw for a day, which is the way it should work for all members of Parliament. So the reality is, I think Mr. Fergus made mistakes. He was fined for it. He had to apologize. Since then, I think he has been working hard to do the right job of Speaker in the House Commons. And I think today's example, where the Liberal Party of Canada apologized, is an example of that.
But Mr. Julian, there does seem to be this sort of terminal kind of sloppiness around things involving the Speaker. You know, it has been a series of things, and each one, it lights the fuse of another assault on his reputation and his independence, and makes the Parliament more difficult to manage. So, I mean, how much longer do you think this Parliament can endure?
Again, he was fined. You're talking about events last December. He was fined. He apologized. Since that time, the Conservatives' big bone of contention is the fact that Mr. Poilievre was asked to withdraw and apologize for using insulting, unparliamentary language on the floor of the House of Commons, like we all are supposed to do. And Mr. Poilievre was forced to withdraw because he refused to do that. Today, Ms. Freeland, as the finance minister, was forced to withdraw and apologize. Members of the House from all parties have been forced to withdraw and apologize. Mr. Poilievre is the one who is refusing to heed what is clear direction on the procedure and rules of the House of Commons, and Mr. Poilievre has a grudge against the Speaker. We understand that, but it is not for the House of Commons to put aside all of the important work that we have to do in the next few weeks just because Mr. Poilievre has a grudge.
So Mr. Villemure, on that point, when Mr. Poilievre was ejected from the House of Commons that day, Mr. Blanchette said he supported the decision, even if he doesn't support the Speaker. But Mr. Terrien, your colleague, said today that Greg Fergus has made the House impossible to manage. I mean, is this the Speaker's fault, or as Mr. Julian says, is it the Conservatives who are causing this, or is it a combination of both, in your view?
Well, there is a combination, of course, but I'm surprised to hear that the NDP is defending the Liberal Speaker so hard. I mean, you know, I could let him defend himself. When you're the Speaker, you hold the highest position, and you are to be held to the highest standards. Now, Mr. Fergus has not been able to reach these ultimate standards. The candy fine he obtained in December, we were totally against it. I think that the first fine was not appropriate. The mistake that he did was much more important than give him some whatever little candy fine. It's not something that we should be played with. We play with the confidence and the trust of the people and the members of Parliament. Now, this is not enough for us.
Okay, one second, Mr. Julian. I just want to ask Mr. Villemure for some clarification. You said that you've looked at the decision-making pattern of the Speaker, and in your view, it's partisan. He's kicked Mr. Poilievre out. He's made other people withdraw, including Chrystia Freeland today. What is so partisan, in your view, about the way Greg Fergus is running the House of Commons?
Well, he was pretty quick with Chrystia Freeland today, and I must say that, and I reward him for that. But after a while, it took a while before acting on Mr. Poilievre. It took a while before acting on many members of Parliament. Now, the thing is...
How is it partisan to go slow on Mr. Poilievre if you are accused of being too liberal?
Well, on this day, he couldn't do anything else. I mean, this was beyond the parliamentary conduct. But in general, he will be very much more easy with the Liberals than he are with the Conservatives. Not that I don't approve of the Conservatives, but he is very much more hard on them than on the Liberals. See, from the Bloc's perspective, we see this as being, we're in between. So we see things from the both sides of the House, and I think that Mr. Fergus just doesn't have what it takes to be in that seat. And it's not a personal offense. The thing is, to be at the highest level, you have to be able to be held to the highest standards, and he's not.
Sorry, Mr. Julian, I cut you off there. Go ahead with your thought.
Well, the Board of Internal Economy reaches decision by consensus, including the Bloc Québécois, and we had a consensus around the next steps to take with Mr. Fergus, the fine and the apology. So it's simply not true that there wasn't a consensus around that. What is different this time from any other election of any other Speaker I've seen is that the Bloc and the Conservatives simply refuse to let go. They feel that they didn't win the election, and they are refusing to heed what is a decision that is made by all parliamentarians once we make that decision. And as I say, with Mr. Poilievre, it's a clear grudge because Mr. Fergus, as the Speaker, has clearly shown that Mr. Poilievre has to act like an adult in the House of Commons, and Mr. Poilievre resents that terribly. To be called to order when he launches insulting, disrespectful, unparliamentary language, to be called to account is something that Mr. Poilievre doesn't like. But I like the fact that we have a Speaker now that is willing to do that, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to get things done.
So Mr. Julian, should I take that to mean you disagree with Mr. Villemure's characterization that Speaker Fergus is easier on the Liberals than he is on the Conservatives? How do you view how he's refereed this?
I've seen more apologies from the Liberals than I have from Conservatives. New Democrats have had to apologize. Bloc members have had to apologize. The difference is Conservatives refuse to apologize and withdraw, as we saw with Mr. Poilievre. And so the Speaker has the tools to hold them to account, and that's the way it should be. We give those tools to a Speaker to maintain order in the House of Commons so we actually get things done for people. And so that's the responsibility for the Speaker. I think that day when he called Mr. Poilievre to order, it launched a grudge match. It's sure from Mr. Poilievre's perspective, but it is sure important for Canadian parliamentary democracy that the Speaker did that.
Mr. Villemure, I'll give you the last word. We've got about 20 seconds.
Well, when over 150 members of Parliament don't have confidence in the Speaker, that's a problem. When one member of Parliament doesn't have confidence, it's a problem. So I think this should be addressed and this should be fixed. And right now, we don't see it fixed. We just see numb apologies from the Liberal parties trying to save Soldier Fergus. We don't agree.
Okay, I don't know if it's a non-apology. I mean, it isn't a pretty explicit taking of blame and saying they're sorry, but obviously it's not enough for you today or your party. Gentlemen, I want to thank you both for being here. I always appreciate you taking the time. NDP House Leader Peter Julian and Bloc Québécois MP René Villemure. Emily Nicola is a columnist with Le Devoir. Michelle Cadario is a former Liberal campaign director. Françoise Boivin is a former NDP MP. And here with me in studio, Kate Harrison is a Conservative political analyst. Okay, Michelle, this language got inserted, the Liberals say, through an auto-populated script that goes into apparently all of their events, so we can only find it in this one. And they have swallowed themselves whole to get Greg Fergus off the hook here. What do you make of this? Just sloppiness or what?
I think it is just sloppiness, and and as they should swallow themselves whole. What a disservice that they did to the Speaker, and to the party. Really, they don't need this kind of thing. There's only so many days till the next election, and every kind of day counts in terms of trying to get back on your footing and set the agenda. And now, this is going to occupy Ottawa and just kind of derail what people are trying to say. Prime Ministers, in the U.S. making an important speech. And what are we talking about today? Mostly, but it's Greg Fergus and who's going to be Speaker. It was a bad mistake. It was absolutely a bad mistake. And I don't understand how it was made. But, if only everybody was perfect.
Well, look, I promise you we are going to talk about the Prime Minister's trip to the United States in our next segment. So stay tuned for that. We're not going to ignore that. But Kate, on this, if it's as simple as the Liberals say that, the script got auto-populated and put in because apparently Speaker Fergus and his office ran the original, what they intended to put out by the clerk, because let's face it, they've had some challenges.
Right.
I mean, is it just an oopsie-daisy and you move on and just let him do his job?
Well, there are a couple of holes, I think, that are worth pointing out here. As you mentioned, that auto-populated language is not consistent across other events that are available on the Liberal website. So somewhere at some point in the system, a decision was taken to run with that particular language. In the screen grab that you showed, it also says very clearly that those events are posted by Team Trudeau, organized by local volunteers. And so that seems to me conflicts with this idea that it was kind of the central Liberal Party that was making that determination. So I think there's still a couple questions here that need to be answered, but this would be an oopsie-daisy if there weren't, 4 or 5 other instances of Speaker Fergus having this lapse of judgment or being accused of being overly partisan. There was doing the John Fraser salute video in his speaker's robes. Then he immediately went to Washington to speak to partisan young Liberals south of the border.
I think he referenced his time as a young Liberal in a speaker event.
Primarily with the Democratic audience.
Yeah, 100%.
And now this, and of course, ejecting Pierre Poilievre for using the term wacko. So if this were the only offense, then I think people would maybe be understanding, but it's not. It's the fourth. And so there's serious questions here about whether or not he has the ability to rise above the partisanship and be neutral as the role demands.
Okay, Françoise, I want to get your take, but I want to show this clip first, because he did kick Pierre Poilievre out for calling the Prime Minister a wacko and not withdrawing and not using the term wacko. And he did admonish the Deputy Prime Minister today for a shot she took at Pierre Poilievre. Just take a listen to this.
Not only does the incompetent finance minister not know the inflation target, she doesn't know that you lock in low rates when you have the chance. Why did he hire the worst mortgage broker in the world to be our finance minister?
The Conservative leader is wearing more makeup than I am today. Now, I think it's wonderful.
Order! I'm going to ask the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance to withdraw that comment. We don't comment on the appearances of members.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry, I withdraw that comment.
Okay, so Francoise, that's where we are as May comes to an end, and we've got a short amount of time to pass a whole bunch of legislation. But that is a rebuke of the Deputy Prime Minister there by the Liberal Speaker on a day where he's being accused of being too partisan. What do you make of all of this stuff today?
If you're asking me if he would have done it otherwise, had it not been today, I'm not sure. I listen to a lot of what is happening in the House of Commons, and basically, even though I've never thought that that was a job for Greg Fergus, I do say that he's finding his footing. He's trying to get order. He just inherited of a house that is very unruly and very undisciplined, and I'm not sure that anybody else would be doing a better job on that front. That being said, on the events, after living a few more moments where independence was put into questions by opposition parties, if there's one thing that the Speaker should have learned by now is to be not just careful, but extra careful with the events he accepts to go to, especially when they are of partisan or political party oriented. And I do take the excuse that the apology that the party is sending his way, but I'm still wondering at this moment if Greg Fergus and even his writing should know that they are the writing represented by the Speaker of the House. Somebody has to be saying to the power to be of the Liberal Party, listen, it's an event with the Speaker. Let's be even more careful. So for that, I do blame the Speaker for not putting the safeguard to make sure that he would not fall a victim to somebody else, because it will always bring in disrepute his independence as a speaker. Will any other speaker satisfy the Bloc and the Conservative? I doubt it very much. Are the NDP really twisting? If it was not a minority government, if it was they were in an opposition in a majority government, I still suspect that they would be some of the first one to go to the mic and say this is unacceptable behavior, and now they're quite happy to have the excuse of the Liberal Party. I find that a bit sad, because honestly, we've never talked so much, David, about the Speaker position. And if there's one position we should never speak about, it's that one.
No, it is an unusual time, Francoise. I'm not going to disagree with you there. So, Emily, we've just got an updated statement from the Conservatives, who essentially say this is the Speaker's responsibility and the Speaker must resign. But we had, Bloc and New Democrat MPs on the show earlier, and Peter Julian said this is just a grudge that Mr. Poilievre and his caucus have against Speaker Fergus. How do you view it from outside the Ottawa bubble?
Well, so what I just heard, list of incidents that the Speaker has been subject to. And, in what Kate just mentioned, you had list of events that, are partisan events that had nothing to do with the role of the Speaker. And then the fourth example was kicking Pierre Poilievre out of the House. And so mixing those two together tells me something about how we're mixing up as a list of the things that the Speaker did bad. Things that had to do with partisanship for which he apologized, and then actually enforcing discipline and doing his job. And so that, to me, informs the theory that you've just been advancing. There's the two happening at the same time. It's a really, really hard time to be a speaker right now because of the level of hyper-partisanship within the House of Commons. And obviously, when you're trying to enforce discipline in that context, it's very, very easy to look for issues with the messenger if you don't like the message that he's been issuing. That doesn't mean that there hasn't been issue with the messenger. And I think because the position is so fragile, it is the worst time ever for the Liberal Party to be doing the kind of rookie mistake that it did today. But at the same time, we do need to acknowledge, there's this tradition when a person is nominated as the role of Speaker of the House, that the person is literally dragged to the throne by the Prime Minister and the leader of the position, because that person, traditionally would have been in danger of the anger of the King or Queen. But now that person is actually in danger, maybe for some other reasons. And there might be now more than ever some reasons for that tradition of dragging a person to the role of the Speaker of the House and being on that throne, because it is absolutely impossible to enforce discipline in the House with the kind of state that we've had, the kind of mood that we've had in the question period, the kind of hyper-partisanship that we have in the question period in the last years, I will say.
An angry king or queen might be easier. Kate, on the conflation of kicking out Mr. Poilievre and the other issues, right? I mean, if Chrystia Freeland had refused to withdraw today, I'm assuming she would have been kicked out.
We can only assume.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, yes, I think that was observed to be, and because Pierre Poilievre did replace the comment. He did not withdraw the comment, but he did replace it, and he was booted out. But there has been a lot of unflattering parliamentary language on both sides of the aisle. And so the decision to come down so firmly on Mr. Poilievre, when you consider the previous instances of partisan behavior on the part of Speaker Fergus, leads one to believe that maybe he's having a hard time ditching his partisanship.
So while this is happening, Michelle, there is a legislative agenda that's kind of stalled. There's about, 5 weeks left before the House rises for the summer break. And I'll show you, if we can, a graphic of what they have to try to get done. The Fall Economic Statement still isn't passed. That was like November that started. Budget Implementation Act, Pharmacare Act, Online Harms Act, Countering Foreign Interference Act. I mean, we're talking about setting up the Foreign Agent Registry. None of this is moving fast. None of this is moving easy, despite, I would say, all of it having majority support in the House. If you just look at the Supply and Confidence Agreement, and the Bloc does support some of these things. Michelle, how do they advance a coherent legislative agenda when the Speaker, through no fault of his own or fault of his own, steps in it, and 150 MPs are targeting every time he does that?
Well, they do have to just plow on. And, I want to go back, though. Let's remember that it was Pierre Poilievre who actually blamed his staffer when he got that picture taken with the person who was like some right-wing extremist. It was Pierre Poilievre who blamed, bad advance planning on staffers in terms of the whole New Brunswick, kind of Nova Scotia situation. So, it's a bit rich to come from him. Unfortunately, in terms of getting the legislation passed, the opposition's got to decide what's important, what's not. They can play games. I'm not sure anyone outside of Ottawa really cares about that. I suspect that they care a lot more about the Budget Implementation Act, about actually getting some of the enhancements that were offered in the budget, some of that great housing initiatives that are out there now. And, it's probably going to mean some late nights in Parliament just to kind of plow it all through. They've been harping about the foreign registry, and now that's in a bill set before them. So they can decide to be helpful, and they can decide to be somewhat cooperative in terms of advancing any kind of legislative agenda, or at least focusing the conversation on that. Or they can kind of play games about whose staffer made bigger mistakes.
Francois, I've got about 30 seconds before I got to take a break, but what does it tell us about how well Parliament is functioning that the Fall Economic Statement legislation is still not passed, despite being tabled in 2023, and it was designed, amongst other things, to give a double top-up to the rural carbon rebate for people that now they cannot get until this is passed? What does it tell us?
Well, it tells us that it's only games. It's sometimes children plays instead of realizing that there's real people who are affected by some of these issues. You might not agree with the Liberal policies, their bills, their legislation, but to try to block constantly the work from Parliament. I find this is not helping anybody in the end. And I'm just not surprised, David, from what we've seen from that Parliament since its election in 2021. It really feels like it's the end of cycle, and everybody needs a huge timeout.